everyone. Welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is September the 13th, and we are in a brand new book today, right? Have I made a mistake? No, we are. It is the book of Daniel, so we're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. This is a famous Bible story is what I would say. At least pieces of it are. You know, if I ask you to recite it to me, many people couldn't recite the full story, but most of them could recite at least the last parts of it, because it becomes it's a Sunday school story. Maybe that's how I describe it. Mm-hmm. So
it's a VeggieTale story.
A VeggieTale story, yeah. So it says King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and language, listen to this king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." This does not explicitly say the statue was in his image. It doesn't explicitly say that. I think we can make the assumption that it was extremely personal to him based on his response. Mm. Whether it was in his image or not, we don't know, but that's the assumption I make. The question I have is what makes or what causes leaders to want to be worshipped? What causes people who are in charge to want people to, worship is the word. They would use respect. Most of those people would use respect. But I see some cases where it looks almost cultish. So
I'm going to go deep on this one.
Okay, go.
I think it's people's insecurities. Mm-hmm. I think that people who want to be treated that way feel insecure that they're going to make wrong decisions and that they maybe don't trust their intuition or their motives, and they want full, worship status, basically, mm-hmm. But they want people to fully obey everything that they do or say without questioning, because they do not want either to have to explain or admit maybe this was not the right decision after all.
I like your answer better than I like mine, so I'm going to take yours and copy it.
What was your answer?
I think it's just like human nature. I think we want people to like us. And so if we're in that position of power, we don't sometimes you don't know whether the people are liking you for you or if they're liking you for your power, but hey, you'll take whatever you can get, I think.
But obedience is not liking somebody. It's just obeying.
Right. But I think of celebrities who are don't know if they have real friends. I don't know, like in interviews, when they talk about that's kind of what I was thinking. I don't know. It's different than worship, but we want people to like us.
Yeah, I see. Obviously, I have been around some celebrities, and they pay for a lot of that. People to serve them, and I think a lot of times people do feel like they pay for certain things and they should expect it. But I see things that are weird. I have been around some famous preachers and saw really, really weird things that I was just this is way over the top. So the one I specifically remember, I had dinner. There would have been 8 of us at the table, and one of them was a really, really famous preacher, and his assistant was on the trip with us. And when he sat down, she came over to the table, opened his water bottle. We had bottled water. Opened his water for him, took hand sanitizer out of her pocketbook, squirted it in his hands.
I thought you were going to say squirted it in his water bottle.
No, squirted
It's
it
like
in
treating
his
him like a toddler.
hands, and then walked away. And I was like,
Okay, so I know who you're talking about. And think about how his story ended.
yeah, I know, exactly. Right.
I mean, he didn't want anybody to be questioning his motives
right.
for sure.
Or anything, questioning anything.
No.
Yeah. And
I mean,
Well, I'm out of this conversation because I have no clue who you're talking about.
Well, it wasn't a pretty end, let's just put it that way. But I guess that is sort of worship.
Yeah, well, he expected that from the people around him. And I was in another situation. This was most recent. This is the most recent thing. And I don't want to give away where I was so that somebody could figure out who it was. But I was in the circle, and this man's assistant, another famous person, that's what I'll say, assistant was there in the going along with us where we were. And I heard somebody ask, "What are you doing out here?" And she said, "The only thing I'm here for is to carry a water bottle and chapstick." And I was like, how horrible is that? Like, I can't imagine just feeling like I needed people to serve me that much. And it becomes almost cultish where, and I think insecurities play a lot into it. I do think people want to be liked, but I think we go too far. I can never, I think I know my role, and I think if I need to demand something, y'all both know where I'm at. But I view y'all as equals. I can't ever imagine thinking you were here to serve me. Like, I just can't. I don't know. It's just weird. And I see it, and it is the hardest thing. It was interesting. I listened to a podcast yesterday while I was walking yesterday evening, and the guy asked the interviewer a question. He was talking about how successful he had been, and he said, "But you seem so humble." And he said, "That's such a rare thing to run into. How do you do it?" And I think it is very difficult, the more success you have, to remain humble and not expect people to go, "Oh, wow, it's this person, and look what they've done." But it says that he gathers everybody together, and they say, when we blow the horns and the trumpets, we're all going to bow and worship. This is not worshiping God, and worship is not only happens in the church. That's not the only place it happens. So what is the power of corporate worship? When people worship together one thing, what is the power of that, and why do you think that's important?
I mean, it's unifying. Because no matter what the differences are between people, if they have that one thing in common and they're worshiping that together, then I think it has the ability to bring people together.
Yeah, I think it heightens the experience. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but like when you're singing with a group of 200 people on a Sunday morning, it's different than when you're singing the same song, listening on your headphones, cleaning the house. It's a different thing. And when you're in a big group of people and everyone is doing it, the whole atmosphere changes.
It does. It significantly it changes. And I think it makes you feel like you're a part. It becomes a connection to the people beside of you, so you become more like one than you would individually and alone. So, but it says some of the astrologers, starting in verse 8, went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. So he has asked for conformity. They're not getting conformity. Why is it in worship or religious circles that we so desperately want conformity? We want everybody to do what we're doing. Everybody raise your hands. Everybody bow your heads. Close your eyes. Everybody stand. Everybody kneel. Why do we want conformity? Everybody dress like this, look like this, act like this, don't do this.
How many more things can you list?
We do want conformity. Yeah.
I think the conformity is easier to control. If you can get just everybody to do everything, the peer pressure takes over. It just becomes easier to control a large group of people. I mean,
it can be bad and good.
And I guess I'm thinking of the bad, of the bad peer pressure. And like on a Sunday morning, like when there's a group of like 20 kids, you can have like 2 people taking care of them, but you also would need like a person taking care of like 2 kids if you're like at home with like, so it's easier when all of the kids are doing the same thing and working together and playing the same games and all of that. It's easier to deal with them. Whereas when the kids are running around the house crazy, it takes 2 adults sometimes to take care of 2 kids. Speaking from my own experience.
4 or 5 adults, yeah. The bigger the group, the more conformity you need. That's my experience.
Which is probably
using kids as an example.
Yeah, and that's probably why mega churches are getting have so much negative press right now, is because some of that conformity was toxic and caused issues that didn't get dealt with, and eventually things come to light.
Did you grow up in a conformist? We did. Did you grow up in a conformist religious group?
I think yes, to a certain extent, but I don't ever remember feeling a lot of pressure about anything. I think you kind of knew what general expectations were, but maybe just because that's what seemed normal. It was like what everybody was wearing or whatever, but I never felt like it was any type of peer pressure or anything like that, or like anybody looked down on you. I don't recall that.
Right. I saw quite a bit of it. And like I said, I think we can sit here and talk about the positives and negatives. You go to a school, you get a classroom of 20 children, some conformity is
necessary,
extremely beneficial to the group. Even to the point of uniforms, can offer some benefit to that group. But it can also be devastating too if managed or handled wrong or things are done wrong. And in the context of church, it helps you know who's in and who's out. In the context of religion, I should say, who's the problem is that it becomes not who's in and who's out, who's with you or who's against you. It becomes who's right and who's wrong, which is a really difficult line in the sand. So they don't bow, and Nebuchadnezzar flies hot. I mean, he is furious. It says he flew into a rage is the word it uses. He brings them to the palace, and he says, I'm going to throw you in the furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my power. In verse 16, it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. I don't know what question to ask here other than how can we better have that kind of faith where we're not worried about what man thinks and we are going to serve God even if it means our death.
That's a loaded question.
I mean, so the way that I grew, like we were just talking about conformity and all that. The way that I grew up was like, this was like something that was preached a lot, was like, follow God, even if it means you get killed for it. And I think that at some point, like all of the teenagers were like expecting somebody to draw a gun to our head and be like, do you believe in God? And like, so I don't know. And I think maybe that was to the detriment of following God on a daily basis in a practical way. So I maybe have a harder time with that question than I should, because that was so drilled into me that like...
Yeah, well, so that would be one of the extremes that I think, you could take.
We had a youth pastor bring a casket in to the youth group and put a mirror in it and had us all walk in and look in it. I'm not even kidding. Like,
now, why didn't you bring this up in the podcast about the bad? What were we talking about? It was like the bad
illustrations.
Yeah, illustrations.
Because I wasn't on that podcast.
But you should have brought it up.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, I guess a lot of it's a question of faith, because they say we know that our God has the power to save us, but even if he doesn't, we have to accept that. We believe that he can, if that's his will. I think it's pretty much what they're saying. And I do think that we often get put in situations that are a lot less dire than this one, that aren't even deadly, couldn't possibly be deadly for us, but that we do find reasons to justify our responses that do not measure up to what God would have us do in those situations. When you don't stand up for what you know is right, when you see somebody clearly saying something that is against what the Bible teaches us, and we don't stand up and say what we should say about it or teach people differently. I mean, I think there's a long list of things. When we give in to peer pressure, I mean, there's so many different things that we could talk about.
Am of the opinion that the average Christian would pass this test if the choice was deny God and live or proclaim God and die. I think the average Christian would pass this test. I think that's theory. But
you mean they'd step in the fire?
Yeah, or be willing to be thrown in the fire. I think. The problem is, it's interesting that you said it was drilled into you. It is almost never going to happen to at least most of the Christians I know. Now, maybe in some other countries, it's a high probability. But in America, it's the likelihood that somebody's going to put a gun to your head and say, deny Christ or die, is close to zero. However, I do think we're faced with lots of other choices where we do deny God. So let's just talk about my role, for example, as pastor. I want to believe I would do what is right in spite of my job or somebody threatening not to give again. I want to believe I would do that. I think, but I see many, many leaders in churches sacrifice morals and convictions because they're afraid that somebody's going to stop paying their tithes, or they're going to lose their job, or they're going to get fired, or people are going to leave. And I would say the times when we fail the most are not life and death. They have more to do with, am I going to keep my job or not keep my job? Am I going to have money or not have money? Am I going to have influence or not have influence? And I think that's when that's when leaders most likely fail is we compromise because we're afraid people are going to walk out of our life when we might just need to let them walk. I don't know. You gave some examples that I think are relevant. I think we compromise about stuff that in the end don't matter. We'd be better off taking a stand for it than if you die. Because I think I know you two enough that if the answer was you're going to die or you're going to denounce Jesus, you would stand by your faith. I think. But the likelihood that's going to happen is almost zero. But there are some high probability.
Right, tell Peter that.
Huh?
Tell Peter that. Deny Jesus.
Oh, yeah. But there are some people that there is a higher probability that you could be put in a compromising situation to either lose your job or cut a corner.
Right.
That do something that is not
ethical.
Edifying. Yeah, ethical. That's a good word. And that's a much more difficult choice to make. Or at least I think it is.
Yeah.
So the time's up. But I had like 6 more questions, so I'm going to ask one.
This is a good passage.
It is. So the story is they get thrown in the fire. The fourth man's there, whom we associate to being Jesus, the Lord, is present with them in the fire. They pull him out, but it is at the end. So they don't smell like smoke, not hair is singed, their clothing's not scorched, but they only pull out 3. So they threw in 3, pulled out 3, but what he saw was 4. And it says, then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race, nation, or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were... Then the king promoted them to higher positions. This is a 180-degree turn from the last proclamation he makes. What effect does our faith lived out on a daily basis have on other people's view of God?
I think when people see consistency in a life and that belief, I think that's invaluable to how, especially like to our children, to our family. There's really nothing else kind of that can take that place of seeing that consistency of trusting God on a regular basis.
I think about that in people in my family who I've been able to watch over decades, and how, like she said, their faithfulness, their consistency, the fact that they're not like this king who's up and down constantly, and can't seem to make up their mind. I feel like watching their lives is a really good example of what belief in Christ and trust in him has really done for their lives and who they became as a result of that. And you want that for yourself. Yeah,
they didn't do what they did for him. They did it for God. Mm-hmm. But the impact they had for doing it for God was significant on him. And I don't think we can discount the power of living a life that is committed to him and the impact that it has on the people around him. So, is there anything else about this story y'all wanted to talk about? Because obviously, it's you don't even have most of these podcasts recently. I've had to refer and refer and refer. This one I didn't have to do much referring to because I knew the story pretty good. Any pieces of it?
I think it's interesting that he had taken these men out of their homeland basically and brought them in and tried his best by changing their names and tried to make them eat certain food, and how he kind of tried to indoctrinate them by the things that they were taught, and he was trying to make them become part of his country basically. And it's really interesting to see how
they resist it.
Not only that they resisted it, but they were an example to him of, I'm going to be dedicated to this one thing in my life that I see as being more important than anything else. And I'm not sure that he saw that anywhere else, because they were, worshiping multiple gods. And, his idea was to create this statue for basically his own religion that people were going to worship. And he thought that that would unify people. Mm-hmm. But he sees this example of something that's totally different than anything he's done or probably experienced. And who knows what kind of effect it had on the other people that were watching their daily lives too. I think that's it's something that we see throughout the Bible, countercultural.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. All right, let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the unfamiliar stories and the familiar ones. Thank you that we can see them through a different light, in different ways at different times. I pray that you would help us to not be victims of culture and of avoiding serving you, but help us to consistently demonstrate our commitment to following after Christ on a daily basis, so that other people's faith are affected and pointed to you, and they would know you better. In Jesus' name, amen.